I left you at Hardung Road in Shanghai during the 1930s and 40s and 50s, right on up until the Mao Zedong's army came up about the Long March. And they came pouring down. And the United States, by the way, refused to give Chiang Kai-shek any weapons to defend themselves over the armies of Mao Zedong because they believed, and I quote, that this was nothing but a agrarian reform. Chiang Kai-shek could have stopped it. Mao Zedong, if it had any bullets to shoot with. Just a little. Okay. I said to you, this is rather hard to grasp. Mike, I'm not sure you ever give any consideration to this. Great preaching with a mute audience. Far richer and higher than anything the institutional church has ever been able to give. Actually works transformation on people's lives. Am I saying that preaching the Word of God can transform people? Under those conditions, the answer is absolutely yes. They are the holiest people you will ever meet, the kindest, most gentle, serene. It'll make your teeth ache to want to be like them. Reverend, everything you ever dreamed of a Christian being is what they are. In Chinese culture. But in the Chinese culture, okay, but we're going to cross that Pacific Ocean. Right up till you scratch them. And they're just as in the flesh as anybody else called a Christian of this world. The only time they function is at the Lord's table. They move in from different places. They hear this great preaching. They become more and more soft and more gentle. One of my professors put it this way: a mild-mannered man preaching to mild-mannered people, exhorting them to be more mild-mannered. Well, that's a typical church service. This is more. This is some of the greatest truth and revelation the world has ever heard. These are the writings and the works of Nee and T. Austin Sparks. T. Austin Sparks held forth longer than Watchman Nee did. And he raised up an incredibly holy, pious people. Again, it make your teeth ache. Brother Nee preached this way, and they were such incredible people. And you've got to understand that many of these people died under communist rule. Some went to prison, some went back to prison, some went back to prison again. Nee was eventually in prison. Now, if I'm not mistaken, he was not in prison on the basis of anything that had to do with communism.
You tried to direct me.
It was a charge of immorality, and we'll spend the rest of our lives not knowing the answer to that one. But they were after him. They found something anyway. I met these people. The first group I ever met in my life was in Louisville, Kentucky, when I met Black Shirey. Now, This is what I didn't understand. And I can only understand it looking back in retrospect. When I walked through that door, who walked through that door was like nothing they had ever seen or heard. Beta felt her prayers had been answered, prayers of a lifetime, that God had finally sent a worker. Well, she was right, but I didn't know that. I was excited about the last work of God on this earth, and I went into that place like a buzzsaw, asking questions. Right, left, and middle. Questions had never been asked before, and nobody else had ever cared. And I kept a barrage of questions up for 3 or 4 days. There were two things I would observe, and the other one I did not observe, but I only came to understand it in retrospect. I want you to know what that little group was, which was so influenced by Watchman Nee. Beta was a worker in the Little Flock movement. And I suppose there were some others there too. And in that room, in the home of Brother Althouse, not Althouse, but Althouse, okay? Okay. In their living room on Sunday was one of these. And they had chairs in the living room. They moved the furniture out of the way, put this up here in its place, and they had a meeting. And it was deader than death. It was hell. But it was the longest existing church in America that had anything to do with the Lord's work in China and the Lord's work in England. T. Austin Sparks had spoken there. Another outstanding leader had spoken there. Help me with the name of the two men who married T. Austin Sparks' daughters. Richard Ackroyd, and who was the other one? Okay, let's just go with Ackroyd. Did he take over the work of Austin Sparks when he died? He did not. No, it was a son-in-law or something that took over Honor Oak. Okay, this was, say his name again, Dan Ackroyd. Richard. Where's Dan Ackroyd? I'm still waiting for you to reverence the old and Salile. Okay, it was Richard Ackroyd. Now, first thing I noticed is they were dead in the doornail, and now I'm stopping right here, and I'm saying to you, when I ask you to stick with this until those two men are dead, I'm saying if it gets that dead, stick with it. Because somebody may walk through that door. I did.
I did too.
Praise the Lord. And I shot those people full of questions, every kind imaginable. And I had no idea why they were so startled at me. And sitting there and meeting Beta would have converted anybody to anything. She was one precious sister. And by the way, that woman knew the cross. Her life was the cross. Richard Ackroyd split that group. And the Althouses split it right back. Who split it, I don't know. But there were now two groups, both who believed in locality. This was 1963. Well, now I come to a difficult spot here. You heard me slip a name just a minute. I don't even know who this guy is. I don't know who he is. I think I shook hands with him. Not the comedian. Richard Ackland. I'm going to try to tell a story from here on, and I'm going to just refer to a gentleman who was the leader. I'm not trying to keep a secret. You don't have to know what he's talking about. Everybody in here knows, but out of respect for him, I don't have any other way to tell the story to by his name or without his name, and I'm not going to use his name right up until I slip. And I'm going to probably do that. I've been trying my best to tell myself, don't do this. Now then, you've never heard this story. You don't know anything about it. You don't know anything about it. My wife does not know 90% of it. Alicia, you don't have any idea about this. Alicia, there's a young lady named Kim who is the daughter of Shirley Lum, who is writing the story of Ala Vista. I'm sorry? Wow. And Bob Emery wrote her an absolutely incredible, beautiful story of how it got started. I mean, it's great. Thank you, Bob, so very much. But when he introduces me at UCLA, he says, Gene Edwards, who was a teacher in a school in Tyler, Texas. And I looked at that. So, you are going to be given with the story of my life before I left the institutional church. If I'm going to be called a school teacher in Tyler, Texas, I never taught a day in Tyler, Texas, or anything else. I want you to know the story of my life until I left the institutional church. I'm not interested in it. It is, as Paul said, it is done. I have never been interested in it, but if he doesn't know any more than that, I did a really good job of keeping from you the story of my life up until the day I arrived in now this guy. So you're gonna I'm gonna pass it out this week. Now then, I'm gonna take up from right there and go back from the time I left the institutional church. When I left the institutional church, I wanted, get clear on this, I wanted to be part of that witness, with that testimony. I was looking for it. I wanted it. I had convictions. I had feelings. I had dreams. I had hopes. And I had not met any of these people. I did not even know that Watchman Nee had been somebody in China. And I had read a book of his, The Normal Christian Life, and then Sit, Walk, Stand, and I tried to read The Spiritual Man. In fact, I'm the first person probably in the world who ever read The Spiritual Man in English, because I had a Chinese friend who used to be part of the little flock, and he'd sit there for hours and read it to me. And I had enough sense then to know that nobody ought to ever translate that book into English. And Brother Nee asked it not to ever be translated, so as soon as they heard that, everybody wanted a copy, and it is now his second largest selling book, even though he was totally opposed to what he wrote, because he wrote it when he was 21 years old. Now you all go out and reap spiritual land. Right. That's right. Did you try? Yeah.
Wait, makes it in your stuff, dude. You read that here. Oh, sorry.
Now I'm going to address a people who believe in oneness and unity like the brethren did. Only we're now in Asia. The gentleman who was one of the 4 or 5 or 6 workers in Asia came to America. And I met him shortly after he began ministry. He had been here several years, but before he started ministry, I suspect I met him within a year. And shucks, it was glorious. It was absolutely glorious. I was too infatuated, too enthusiastic, and too blind to notice much. But I did notice a little. Now, I went to the Far East in order to meet with the little flock. I had already been to Louisville, Kentucky, and I had heard many wonderful things. I also want you to keep in mind that preaching the highest gospel in the world does not transform you except skin deep, or maybe a little really deeper than skin deep. These are holy people. People pray a lot. Pray more than we do. And that was one of their problems. I'm going to throw in another gimmick. Get those people praying for you and they'll give money. Did you ever hear that statement? If you haven't, at least you can get it figured out that way. I got a real problem with prayer. And I'm going to lay down my problem this weekend. I've carried this burden long enough. I'm going to get rid of it. So I got there. And we landed in Taiwan. And we were met by a coronation line of people. Oh, this was beautiful. 500 people on this side and 500 people on this side. They would just spread out enough. And there were others on the trip with me, but the gentleman in charge, the one I will now refer to as the leader, he got hold of me. And we went down that line at the airport. And we were doing like this. He was doing like this. I was doing like this. And I was shaking hands and I stopped and hug people every once in a while. Very impressed. And then we had a conference. And then we met with them on Sunday morning. On Sunday morning, I went to their meeting. This is a huge meeting place to hold how many people? You never went there? Well, then I can make it as big as I want to, then can you? No, it could easily hold 1,500 to 2,000 people. And all the men sat on this side. All the women sat on this side. And every woman in that building had a black doily on their head. Now, I'm going to ask you, how much work does it take to get a group of people, the men sit on one side and the women sit on the other, and every woman with exactly the same doily on their head? You want to make a guess? I don't know. Well, you don't do that with one message. That takes some high, tall preaching. Now, while the conference was going on, and their hospitality is unbelievable. And on Saturday afternoon, every woman in that church was there with a little spray bottle and a rag. And I don't know, there must have been 2,000 glass panes on that house, in that building. It wasn't walls, it was glass panes. And they were on ladders and down on the floor and up bigger ladders, and every one of those panes got cleaned on both sides. These were called service Thank you so much. The window service groups. Thank you so much. Well, they had these people who cooked our meals. They had single women who wore those doilies and their long robes, and they were single, and those women took care of us night and day. And we had meals 3 times a day. I did not know what brought him to America. Really. But there's a long string of buildings, rooms. And they put one brother in this room, and they put me in this next room under a mosquito net. And then there was the living room, and there was somebody else, and then there was Don Marcy and his wife, whose name I believe was Joel. Well, there was some sort of a fight going on. And they used the living room, which was next to me. Now, I was just then recovering what, Debbie, I want you to do me a favor here. I want you to read up on disseminated histoplasmosis, and I want you to find out everything you can about it, because I'm going to stop calling it disseminated histoplasmosis because people just kind of look and roll their eyes. You're going to discover that it says it is identical to cancer, and it moves through the body the same way. I had just gotten out of bed from disseminated plasmosis, but you could just might as well call it cancer benevolent system. It crawled all over my body and eaten up just about everything in there. And I was a very, very sick man, but I did not care. You have no idea how much burned inside of me. No, you have no idea how much burns inside of me. And they sat there in that living room and fought till 2 and 3 o'clock in the morning. And then we had breakfast at 6. I talked to Don Marcy, and he said, forgive me again, but this is Don, I didn't say this. He said, Gene, they get there in that living room and they chicken talk to one another all night long. I did not know what was going on. I just know that there was anger, and I know it went on for hours and hours and hours. It was the beginning of problems. This is 1965. I spoke at the gathering of some 5,000 people there. I spoke to the church there. Then I went to the Philippines. And when they took me off the airplane at the Philippines, they drove me by a place and they said, this is where the other group meets. They took us to court. What kind of Christians is that? And I tried my best not to let this register. Then I got back to Hong Kong. And I met Brother James Chen. I attended their meetings there. Now, this was a big church, and it was a building, just like you couldn't tell any difference. It had a balcony. And I walked in, and I took my place in the balcony on the right side. And I sat down with all men, and right here in the hall, and there's the aisle, and all the women, all the little doilies, downstairs, doilies, men. And here's a man whom God had given a vision of what the church was supposed to be. And I'm sitting there, and I remember a Chinese guest came up to the balcony, and he wasn't paying any attention. He sat down here on this side over here, and one of the ushers came and got him and started pulling him over this side. He was confused. He didn't know what to think. And then he finally noticed this whole crowd of people. He looked at these people, and then he got over and sat down. And I thought, if that doesn't fit with the Chinese, it doggone sure doesn't fit with me. Still, I love those people. Now, by the time I spoke to that huge gathering, and as I got involved in the church in Hong Kong, and I'm sorry, but I don't remember if I preached there or not. But everything in me says I preached there because of what happened. And I had been in Taiwan. I had been and preached in the Philippines. And then the people who were in Taiwan, they went back to Indonesia and Singapore and Malaysia and to the Philippines and 2 or 3 other places and to Tokyo and some other places I've long since forgotten. And suddenly there came these telegrams. They do everything by telegrams. We will, Gene Edwards, do not send him home to America. Is my wife present? No. Boy, can somebody go get her? Just tell her I need her 1 minute. Well, I don't want to finish that story without her. So I'm sitting up here in a room. I am 31 years old. I am sicker than sick can get. And then what brings in this leader. And he said, letters, telegram, phone calls, everywhere. Everybody wants you to stay. I just was about to tell him I was too sick to go. I had to go home. And he said, someone must take over the work in Asia. Somebody must go now to the Philippines. Who shall it be? I'm in a great big room. There are 2 people in it. Who shall it be? Who shall it be? So, ill. I thought I had recovered from this because I got out of bed. It's like the flu, when you finally get out of bed, you think you're going to be over. Well, this one never gave up on me, not until this hour. And I said, okay, I'll go. Now, I want you to go, and go, and of course, and we call so and so and so and so. He didn't wait 1/10 of a second. He had me mapped out for the next 5 years. And every year, I want you to fly home to the United States and be with us in our summer conferences. You might as well take in Elijah's robe, Elisha's robe, Ward's robe, Paul's robe, and Peter's robe, and put that thing around me the way I felt right now. I was not ready for this, saints. Anyway, when I got to the Far East, when I got to the Philippines, I stayed there for 6 weeks, 2 months. Oh, I started church there. That church still there. They had a Chinese church, which is ridiculous. The Chinese church in the Philippines. It's not made out of Chinese, made out of Filipinos. So I started a church for the Filipinos. And the language was not English, it was Tagalog. Galo. And I collapsed. And I sent a wire to this brother, and I gotta go home. I'm too sick. You're not gonna have anything but a hospital bed here. And now I'm going to play dirty. Right? Real dirty. I'm going to tell the truth. There were 3 other brothers with me. All whose names you know Mike very well. And they were mortified at what they were seeing. But when this gentleman walked in, it was the most wonderful thing in the world. This is great. This is fantastic. And then they were also shocked at anything I did because they were religious people and I'm not a religious person. And they had just chewed me out about something I did. And this gentleman sat down with us to eat lunch, and I said, brother, he have said that I have been wrong in doing this, that, and the other. What do you say? Nobody in this world has ever done that to him, and nothing that nobody ever done anything. They never did anything done right either. Okay, and they had never been done this way either, and they were mortified. So he gave his answer, which was, well, yes, what you did, Gene, was perfectly acceptable. And I said, did you get that? Did you get that? Did you hear that? And these guys were going, I'll tell you exactly what you were. Did you ever see them do that? I just got to, huh? In a pinch? Okay. All right. I just stopped being dirty. That's the end of my being dirty. No, it's not either, because those men were so critical of everything he did, and I had kept my mouth shut the whole time. And then he came over to the Philippines with his other brothers, and they had just coated him with butter the whole time. And I had a few minutes to get to the airport. And James B. See how much I've learned from these people? You use the first name and the last initial. All right. Standing up against a limousine. Was going to take me to the airport. And he turned to me and he asked me what I thought. And I might as well have had a skywriter write that in the sky and then keep it all the way across the Pacific, across to California and to the other way all over to Europe. I said, well, I bet everything in me knew I was going to get hung for this. I said, other than their love for one another, I don't see anything here I want to see in America. And man, when I said it, I could just tell James B. going, hot dog, I got him now. Forgive me, but those men were absolutely four-flushing hypocrites in the way they worked with that gentleman. So I got on the plane and I flew home. And my dear wife and 2 children, could she ever get here? Well, it's too late now. Okay, well, that's fine. I'll just tell you that my wife had packed everything on earth and given up our apartment and was being flown she had her ticket to be flown to the Philippines. When I sent that telegram to him saying I was too sick to continue, and when I was too. I was one distraught human being. They had had fights. They had had splits. And I think I was beginning to understand then that all the great preaching in the world, if you don't have a life some way dealt with by means other than preaching, you don't have anything at all. And I got to the meeting and I was sought out. In fact, I had just gotten home. I was sought out. And a brother said to me, Gene, our brother, the leader, has asked you not to report back to your trip to the Far East. I am not a fool. He said, wait until it report when you get back. All of them get back. Well, I knew that writing was like this. It said, Gene Edwards, you're persona non grata. You're in, this is where you get off. And I had a crisis that Sunday. That was one of the hardest fought battles of my life. I knew that movement was about to spread, and I knew that it was about to destroy thousands of lives. I was as clear of that as I am of my own name. And I went to the meeting that morning when I was forbidden to speak or report. And this word had gotten back. Gene didn't say anything in there with the Far East except love, or people's love for one another. I was wrong about that part. Now, y'all going to have to forgive me, but you got to understand, I've been sitting 4 years. In fact, when was 1965? Thank you. And I was torn and ripped to shreds that morning. And I found out that the church there, a place called Eldon Hall, was on the verge of a split because of the way the people had taken over. Well, I was in the Far East and the others were in the Far East. These men, these white men, these proteges, had just been treating everybody horrible, and there had been so many people come in there idealistically and alive and gung-ho, and they were shocked. And one of them came to see me before Sunday. And his name was Paul Border. And Paul and I, we've gone straight to the bowels of hell together. So Paul came over and he talked to me, and I was just a young man, just torn to shreds. I came there to become part of the Lord's testimony. And that's all I wanted. And I never had any ambitions to be a leader. And I had already heard many times that Gene is the heir apparent. Well, there was every reason to believe that because he hardly ever brought a message to even talk about me. I don't know where he got that idea. I don't understand it. I had no ambitions in it. And my dreams were crushed. And I was talking to Paul just a few days ago. I talked to him about once every 5 years. He said, Gene, you remember that day? I said, yeah, I remember that day really well. I'd come home from the meeting. I had slipped to the edge of my chair once or twice. I came that close to standing up and saying about it. Thank God I hadn't. You'd have never met me if I had. And my apartment was upstairs, and I was up at the top of the apartment. I was down like this, my head and my face. And Paul came in, and he sat down at the bottom of the stairs. And he was amazed that I was just ripped to shreds about what I saw and what was going on over there. So he came over and sat down at the bottom of the staircase, and I was up there at the top, and I said, Paul, I have absolutely nothing to live for. He said, it's worse than that, Gene. You and I are in trouble with an apostle. And when you're in a trouble with an apostle, you're in trouble. And I remembered that, but I didn't remember what I said to him after. And he told me this last week. He laughed and he said, Gene, you know what you said after that? I said, no. He said, Gene, this is what you said to me. And this is me speaking. I said, yeah, we're in trouble. Man, when you're out of Flitz, you're out of beer.
Put a couple of names in here.
And that's kind of the way it was with me. I was out. I did something that maybe have separated me from everybody else. Men were leaving by the drove. I didn't leave. I said, Lord, I'm going to stay here. This is where I was the last time I saw you. I'm not moving until I see you again. Wow. That saved my life. And for the next 3-4 years, I lived in living hell. I lost the sense of salvation. Some of you have read that in the book, but you never heard when. I had absolutely no sense of an indwelling Lord. And you've never had that experience, and very few people have, and you don't ever want to have it. And I remember one day Paul was in my home, spent the night there, and he got up the next day, he was in the bathroom shaving, and he was singing, and it dawned on me that I had not sung a single word in years. And it was there that I learned that there was one thing I could do, and that was to listen to Christian music. And there have been many a pilgrim who has just been on the bottom of it all and could not find their way, and I had said to them, go get some Christian music. I'd just sit there and cry and listen. I only had 2 or 3 records. Helen and I were poor than a Job's turkey. All my clothes wore out. And Van, I had some good-looking clothes. Because I had been an evangelist and a preacher. Our undergarments wore out. Our shoes wore out. And I would like to thank General Motors for having made something called a Chevy 2. That we did not have a penny in this world to repair that car. And everything on that car was broken. And we couldn't put a penny in it. But doggone that thing started and moved a little bit every day. And that was the mercies of God. Now I'm off the subject, but you still need to know it. No sense of God. I got to back up a little bit. I guarantee you what I'm about to tell you, there's nobody in the world that was this story. In those few days that I was there, and I'll tell you how I got out, it was mercies of God. All these men started coming over to me, telling me what they'd been through, and it was all horror stories. Stories that would continue being horror stories for the next 40 years. Say amen to that. And they said to me, Gene, you got to stop this man. And you got to stop this work. And that church was split right down the middle. From the conduct of what had been going on from J.E. and some other guys. Named Bill Mallon. Phil, I can't use his initials. You just met Gene Edwards, the unreconstructed minister. And you know what I did? I went to every person in that church by names I knew. And I sat down with them and I said, it ends here. You get back into that building and you sit under that man and don't you move. It's where you belong, and don't you dare split that church, and don't you dare try to stop this work. And somebody was being born those days. And you know what reward I got for that? I was charged with trying to split the church. Well, I got a job, finally. Over at a place called Altadena. It was another little group meeting. There were several meetings sort of as satellites to that, and they were just like us. They thought this was the grandest thing in the world. And without my knowledge, they said, we're in Altadena, and Gene works in Altadena. He's a school teacher in a ghetto. And ill, I'd come home from work, and Helen would drive up to the car and open the door and literally pull me to the bed. I got in that bed and I stayed there until it was time to go to work the next day. I did not move. I was swollen. I shuffled when I walked. I was in excruciating pain, and my Lord had left me. At least that's the way it felt. And you know what I learned? I learned a lesson. And that is, you walk by faith. You do not walk by any feelings on this earth. You walk by faith. And that's all I have. And by the way, I will say this. I learned that from reading something by Gene Guyon. And it will tell you something. Now I'll say it again in a minute. Those of you who have trouble with church or have problems at home and life like that, we walk by faith. We don't walk by circumstances. We don't walk by how good we feel. I don't see John. David O'Connor. Who's David O'Connor? That's the speak time. Okay. David, is your wife here? We walk my faith. Anyway, this little group of people they did it by the book. They wrote a letter to the Eldon Hall, and they said he lives in this town and he works in this town, and we want him to meet with us. Oh, if God ever was merciful to a matter. I don't know if I'd have been excommunicated or what would have happened to me, but that just pleased everybody. And for the next 2 years, I met with that little group of Christians. And one time, we went into a meal. It was at the end of 2 years. Oh, I took a deep breath and I walked into Eldon Hall. And I was in a meeting and people stared at me like I was the devil himself. And I don't think I was fully aware of just how black my name had gotten. But it was par for the course. Mike, it was par for the course. They did this with everybody. Say amen. Amen. I think I was there, right? And as I walked, the dead unlooked. I could have been barefooted. That was hardly used for it now. Yes. No. Anyway, I picked up a sheet of paper on the desk. No, table, as I walked out. I don't know why I picked that thing up, but I ain't lived to regret it. I had no idea what it was. I don't think I ever looked at it. I just walked down, got to the door, and I took
You really got a rap out of that. Yeah.
I want you to understand, I'm trying to explain to you the present status of God's work on this earth. So this day, you will be told that I am a thief. And I stole from the church because I picked up a sheet of paper.
Stealing the ministry.
I'm what?
Stealing the stuff. Oh, that it? Thank you. Yeah.
You knew, huh? Okay. Back at Eldon Hall, you know, one of the things I noticed in the Far East is when you had elders, you kept them forever. Yeah. And boy, those men were elders when they weren't elders. A man will become an elder if you give him that title. I don't care if he becomes the devil himself. That man will continue on being an elder and honor to be called an elder. Now you know why we don't have elders. That name has been too perverted to ever be able to function in its proper way. I do not know how to express to you the next few minutes. I was watching a man gain absolute control over people's lives at any cost. I was watching men, either in their soul or their flesh, I have no idea, but not in their spirit, ruthlessly throwing people out, taking over other people's works, and fighting to maintain their ministry. And I lived on a place called Home Park. And the phone rang. There's a guy named Petrie. I don't remember his first name. And he said, Gene, have you heard that Campus Crusade is split? John led it, and they all want the church. And they want you to get out to Kansas immediately and speak to them as their apostle. Now, y'all don't know what that means. I'll tell you exactly what it means. It means absolutely nothing. Those are just the way they were. So I drove over to San Bernardino, and we had 2 or 3 cars, and we were going to rendezvous in Missouri. And there were 2 men sitting on the back. You've heard this story before. And one of them was named Hal Lindsay, and the other one was Gene Edwards. And we drove for 3 days and nights fighting over eschatology. Oh. Yeah, Hal won. Well, we didn't fight. We were really jealous, but we know. We were still friends, still are. I got there, and I can tell you that was nothing. It was just foolishness. But I got back, and it was late 68. I had a phone call. And it was those men, and they were holding a conference at UCLA, and it was the night before New Year's, and they asked me if I'd like to come over. They're the kind of guys who stay up all night talking. And so I will leave you at UCLA. I didn't know it was going to take as well. And I am on my way to UCLA to see Hal Lindsey, somebody Walker, Dick Ballou, John Braun, and Victor was just a precious man that ever there was. Big, tall, Ray Nethery. And it was the day that changed our lives. And so, you know what we're going to do? I don't know what we're going to do. That's the end of that. The status of the testimony of the Lord's work up until 1969.
Subscribe and click the bell to stay connected to more profound teachings that draw you deeper into union with Jesus.